Today we're going to talk about order of operations. And you've probably heard of order of operations before. Everybody hears PEMDAS or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. But today I'm going to talk about them a little bit differently because PEMDAS does not really always work. So whenever you're doing order of operations, so you're trying to find the answer to a mathematical expression, you always start inside parentheses. And the first thing you want to do is either exponents. So in this example, 5 to the third power, this is the exponent, and it means 5 times 5 times 5, or 5 times itself 3 times. So if you see that, you would do that first, or you might see a root, like the square root of 25. And the square root of 25 is 5, because 5 times itself is 25. Now, to figure out which order you do this, you always move left to right. So if there are no exponents or no roots in your problem, or once you've taken care of them, you move on to the next step, which is multiplication and division. And you'd move left to right whenever you're multiplying and dividing. Now, multiplication and division can be tricky because there are different ways to write multiplication and different ways to write division. So I have some examples here. This is like the traditional x, 5 times 2, and we all know, 5 times 2 is 10. But this dot also means multiplication, 5 times 2. Here, this is confusing because this is 5 and then a 2 within parentheses. But because there's nothing here in between the 5 and the 2, or in between the 5 and the parentheses, this actually means 5 times 2, same thing. And then over here, it's same deal, 5 times 2, each number is in parentheses. And since there's nothing in here, we act like there's an invisible multiplication sign. So all of these mean 5 times 2, or 10. And then with division, this is the traditional division sign, 10 divided by 2, but you also might see it with a fraction bar, and this means the exact same thing, 10 divided by 2 is 5. And then after that, you'll do addition and subtraction from left to right. Once the parentheses are gone, you repeat the same steps. So here, I didn't write out the whole thing, I just wrote out the letter. So E is for exponents, so you do exponents and roots, left to right. Then you do multiplication and division, left to right. And finally, you do addition and subtraction, left to right. So let's see what this looks like now with some example problems. Example 1 here. We're just going to do 5 to the third power. So what does 5 to the third power mean? Well, like I said earlier, it just means 5 times itself 3 times. And so we're definitely going to want to write that out. 5 times 5 times 5. And once you've written it out, it's pretty easy to do because now we've taken care of the exponents by expanding it, and all that's left is multiplication, which is our next step. So we'll move left to right. So I'm going to start with 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. And then whatever's left that you haven't already used, you're going to bring down. So I'm going to bring down the dot, and I'm going to bring down the 5. And 25 times 5 is 125. So that's my answer for example 1. Let's look at example 2. Example 2 is going to be 4 parentheses 19 plus 1. So we always start inside parentheses, and I do have parentheses here, so I really need to pay attention. And inside parentheses, it says you start with exponents and roots. And there are no exponents in here and no roots. So then it's on to multiplication and division, left to right. And again, inside the parentheses, I do not see multiplication and I do not see division. So I'll move on to addition and subtraction, left to right. And I do have addition here. So 19 plus 1 is 20. So I'm going to bring that little v to just show this is what I'm doing. And 19 plus 1 is 20. And I'm going to bring down the 4, and then we need to know that since there's nothing here, there's an invisible multiplication sign. So what I like to do is actually bring down the parentheses, because remember over here, that means multiplication. So I haven't quite gotten rid of the parentheses, but since there's nothing to do inside of them, we're down to just a single number, I can kind of move on to this step once parentheses are gone. These parentheses here just mean multiply it by 4. So parentheses are gone, no exponents, no roots. There is multiplication. So 4 times 20, since 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 20 is 80. Box in your answer, and we're done. For example 3, it's going to get a little bit more complicated. I'm going to bring in a new piece of paper here. For example 3, we've got 3 parentheses, 10 minus 7 minus 2 times 4. All right, there is a lot going on here. I've got parentheses, I have this invisible multiplication, I've got subtraction and another subtraction and a multiplication. So this is where it's going to be really important that we go through our steps. So we'll start inside parentheses, and there's really only one thing to do inside parentheses, and that's 10 minus 7. So I'm going to show that I'm using these up. 10 minus 7 is 3, and I'm going to bring everything else down. Minus 2 times 4. Okay, I'm bringing everything else down. So at this point, I still have these parentheses, but remember that that just means multiply. So I'm going to move all the way down here. Once parentheses are gone, exponents and roots left to right. I don't see any exponents and I don't see any roots, so I can move on to multiplication and division left to right. And I am going to have some multiplication and division to do. So left to right, we go just in the order that we read. So the first multiplication I come to is right here, 3 times 3. So that's going to be my next step. 3 times 3 is 9, and every time you do a step, bring everything else down. So bring down the minus, bring down the 2, bring down the dot, bring down the 4. So I'm still on the multiplication step because I've got multiplication left. So I'm not going to do the 9 minus 2 here because multiplication is my step that I'm on right now. So I'm going to show my V over here, and I'm going to do 2 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8. And then remember, bring everything else down. So bring down the 9, bring down the minus. 9 minus 8 is 1. And that's my answer. So that one was definitely a little bit more complicated. Our last problem is example 4. 5 plus 6 divided by 3 minus 9 plus 2 to the third power times 3. Don't get intimidated by all these numbers. As long as we follow the order of operations, we'll be just fine. So start inside parentheses, and hopefully you can see here there are no parentheses, so that's nice. That means I get to skip all the way down to this step once parentheses are gone. And I start with exponents and roots. So I'm going to look through my expression, and I do see that I have exponents here. So in this case, I think because this is such a complicated problem, I'm going to come out to the side, and I'm just going to do some background work. I'm going to figure out what 2 to the third power is. And 2 to the third power means you multiply 2 by itself 3 times. So I've got 2 times 2 times 2. And all I've got here is multiplication, so I'm going to go left to right. 2 times 2 is 4. Bring down my dot. Bring down my 2. 4 times 2 is 8. So I'm going to come back to my original problem, and I'm just going to replace this part with 8, because 2 to the third power equals 8. So I've got 5 plus 6 divided by 3 minus 9 plus 8 times 3. And I don't see any more exponents, and I don't see any more roots, so it's time to move on to multiplication and division from left to right. So the first thing I come to is this division. There is multiplication, but in this case, division is going to come first because as I move from left to right, I get to the division first. So I'm going to make my little V to show that I'm going to use up the 6 divided by 3. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. And then I'm going to bring everything else down. So I'm going to bring down the 5 and the plus, minus 9 plus 8 times 3. And I'm still over here on this step, multiplication and division. So let me look through and make sure it's all gone. I've got addition, subtraction, addition, and there is another multiplication. So that's what I'm going to have to do first. 8 times 3 is 24, and then I'm going to bring everything else down. The 5, the plus, the 2, the minus, the 9, and the plus. So everything else comes down. And now finally, I'm done with multiplication and division, and I can move on to addition and subtraction. And I'm just going to go through left to right. So the first one I come to, just like you read, is 5 plus 2. 5 plus 2 is 7. Bring everything else down. 7 minus 9 is what comes next. And actually this is a little bit tricky because 9 is bigger than 7. So when I do 7 minus 9, I know I'm going to end up in the negative numbers. It's sort of like you can imagine if you have $7 in your pocket and you have to take 9 away, you know, because you told your friend, oh, I'll give you $9. When your friend asks for the $9, you're not going to be able to pay your friend back. You're still going to owe them $2. And so that means we have a negative 2 as our answer. So we have negative 2 plus 24. And again, when I think about money here, it's like owing $2, but then suddenly somebody gives you 24. So in the end, you're still going to have $22 in your pocket. So our answer is 22. And that's how you do the order of operations.